Welcome everybody. We expect a few more people, but we'll get started. Welcome to the April partnership meeting between the Round Oak Missionary Baptist Church and Shaare Tefila. I am Lisa Hedgepeth, and I'm the chair of the Social Action Committee at Shaare Tefila. Tonight, we will be talking about the Black Jewish Alliance, past, present, and future. And we watched Shared Legacies as an educational and historical guide for this discussion. The film opened with a profound quote from an African proverb that says, "If the surviving lions don't tell their stories, the hunters will get all the credit." And early in the film, Dr. Clarence Jones, who is an advisor to Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., said, "The coalition of African Americans and Jews together can redeem and reclaim the soul of America." So let's get to work. After a few remarks from Rabbi Lehman and Pastor Pointer, I will introduce our three panelists. They will each share a few thoughts with you, and then we will open the floor to questions. And the way that will work tonight, since we have so many people, is you will just type your question into the chat box, which is at the bottom of the screen. And if you need help, let us know. You just type your question in, and one of our moderators will read your question, and the panelists will respond. Okay, so again, welcome, and here's Rabbi Lehman.
So I'd like to offer a prayer. Dear God of justice, we turn to you this fateful evening as the source of justice. We are satisfied that justice has been served for George Floyd today. There is hope that justice can be colorblind. This evening, we also reflect upon how we are continually inspired by the work of your faithful servants, Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and Rabbi Dr. Abraham Joshua Heschel, who walked arm in arm over the bridge in Selma and who prayed with their feet as they marched for civil rights. As we recall their work that brought the Jewish and Black communities together over 50 years ago, we pray that today we can also work together. Let us heed Dr. King's call for action from the Birmingham jail. Let us understand, as Dr. King did, that, quote, "an unjust law is no law at all." We must work together to confront racial injustice, and we must work together to bring your justice to our world. Let us remember that we strive to be your partner, O God, in perfecting the world under your sovereignty. By your light, may we see light. May we see your spark in each of us, and may we nurture that light of justice together, so that in the words of your prophet, V'yigal kamayim mishpat, may justice flow like a mighty stream. Amen.
Pastor Pointer.
Yes, thank you, Lisa. We greet you this evening and all who are gathered, grateful for the endeavor that Shaare Tefila and the Round Oak Church have entered into. I am blessed by my counterpart, Rabbi Lehman, to be in this endeavor where we are pursuing the sentiments of his prayer. And certainly on behalf of our two congregations and ourselves, I want to welcome, even before they're introduced, those members of the panel tonight, whom I wait in great anticipation to hear. Rabbi Abbi, Sharovsky, Reverend Dr. Timothy Warner, whom I do know, Pastor Emory United Methodist, and the Sister Lisa Weitzman. We're delighted that you have joined to both enlighten and edify and share with us on tonight. I'm sure that both of our congregations will be the better or at least have a better perspective, given what you're going to share with us. I represent a predominantly Black congregation. I do have white members, but I represent a predominantly Black congregation, and so we come to this effort with our perspective, of which I do not represent everyone there or in America who are Black, but I am typical and atypical, and therefore you might consider a normal. But my perspective and our perspective, I am certain, is based upon our experiences, the environment that we come out of, and that we are hoping to share so that we can unify and achieve the sentiments of the prayer of Rabbi Layman. Therefore, by way of introduction and on this occasion, I will share with you that I am a product of the city in which and state in which George Floyd was raised, Houston, Texas, where I was born in 1948 in the St. Elizabeth's Hospital in the 5th Ward section that was referred to for several reasons as the Bloody Fifth of Houston, Texas. Floyd came out of the CUNY homes in 3rd Ward, but we originated in the same, he was raised in Houston, I was born there. I'm a product of the public school system of that city, where it was not until my last year in high school at Phyllis Wheatley High School, that is named for a Black poet of that name, Phyllis Wheatley, that I encountered a white teacher who happened to be a librarian for the first time. But I was nurtured and disciplined even by the very fine teachers in my high school, from which I graduated in '66. But it was the last year that I encountered a white teacher, whether Jew or Gentile, I have not known, but she was indeed white. It was in 1955. And in fact, it is in the calendar that I think most of us have, that was produced by the Equal Justice Initiative. And parenthetically, we began one of our sessions, and this is the third, having viewed the film Just Mercy that was produced and based upon the life of the attorney Brian Stevenson, who is the founder and executive director of EJI. And in the August month, on the 28th day, there is a caption regarding Emmett Till. It was in 1955 when I opened, as I usually did every week, the Jet magazine that my parents subscribed to, that I was traumatized by the picture of the body of Emmett Till, who was lynched by two men at the age of 14 in Mississippi. He was from Illinois, for being a normal Black heterosexual. I was traumatized by that disfigured face in an open casket that had been captured on within that Jet magazine in 1955. And I was more appalled when we discovered that a jury of his peers had found him not, had of their peers had found the two men who killed him not guilty in the latter part of that same year, 1955. And learned in 1956 in an interview with Look magazine that they had confessed to the murder because they had no problem with doing so because they could not be subject to double jeopardy. Fast forward, when I got in the car with my father, the Reverend Dr. L.P. Pointer Sr., and mother, Sidonia Pointer, both of whom are in heaven now. And we began a long journey from Houston, Texas to Washington, D.C. I had siblings living in Maryland, but we began this long journey through Dixie, eating in the car and not stopping because there was no room in any inn, making our way to Washington, D.C. for the March on Washington without stopping. And we feasted on my mother's fried chicken in brown paper sacks until we finished that. And then we ate bologna and cheese and crackers the rest of the way, along with one of my favorites, grape-fed sodas, and of course, bottled water. And when we got to Washington, I saw something for the first time. It was called then Chocolate City. I think that the title has gone down to Atlanta, but I saw Black policemen in regular blue uniforms. In the South, and those of us from the South, they remember that they wore brown uniforms, but in DC, they wore the regular uniform, and I was amazed by that sight. And having come for the march, my father and our family went to the Lincoln Memorial, and I, as a 14-year-old Black teenage youth, the same age as Emmett Till when he was lynched, heard Dr. Martin Luther King's sermon, I Have a Dream, which of course was featured in the documentary that I viewed for the first time on the 18th of this month, just a few days ago, and didn't have an opportunity to tape it and therefore study it in detail, but was impressed by its capture of history, especially the relationship between Rabbi Herschel and Dr. King. As perhaps you have been, I have been glued to the television watching the proceeds of the trial in Minnesota of the policeman who murdered George Floyd. And I was just as grateful to God as was expressed by Rabbi Lehman for the verdict, which was just, unlike the decision by the jury of the peers of the two men who lynched Emmett Till. So that we have entered with perspectives, but with a common objective. It is not only an alliance that I'm prayerful about, it is because alliances are based on goals. It is rather a brotherhood. I want to have a brother in Rabbi Laban. I want to have a brother and a sister in Lisa. I want people with the same God in them that I have in me, so that we can share on a par, on a level, so that you don't have to call me when you are confronted. When I see the confrontation and it is not of God, I'm there, which I noticed in the film, and that I could depend on the same response when I'm facing trials and tribulations. I don't necessarily have to call. If you are aware of it, then you are there in prayer, in person, and in whatever way you can render aid, and I likewise can render aid. So that we have entered into this cooperative effort, and I have promised by insinuation, I state now that I'm not trying to proselytize. But if you ask me why I believe and behave as I do, then I will answer you honestly. No, the focus, I think, is on personalizing struggle so that we can cooperate in bringing about an end to injustice and systemic racism in our world. I believe that the past has certainly given us a history and a foundation. I believe that the present challenges that we face should compel us to activism, and I trust that our hope for the future and the future of our sons and daughters will cause us to make a greater commitment in our spheres of influence, so that one by one, as we are transformed, we can pass on this transformative experience to our children, and they can do that with their children. I am very hopeful. I have faith in God. I know that it can be done in His own time, in His own way, through us. He has no hands. He is a spirit, but He uses our hands. He has no heart, but He uses our hearts. He has no feet. He's going to have to use our feet. He uses our voice. The prophet who was entered in the prayer was a voice that God used to transform our lives. And so I welcome the relationships that we're forming, and I'm excited about the change that's going to come about through us in our community, our various congregations, community, and certainly in our world. God bless you, and we love you even now.
Thank you. Thank you, Pastor Pointer.
Thank you.
So I will quickly read all three short bios of our panelists, and then I will pass along to them, and the three of them will speak, as I said. Our first panelist tonight is Rabbi Abbi Sharovsky. She's the Director in Intergroup Relations, Rabbi in Resident for JCRC, which is the Jewish Community Relations Council in the DC area. She studied at the Jewish Theological Seminary and was ordained in 2012. She also holds a master's degree from the Davidson School of Jewish Education at the Jewish Theological Seminary, specializing in experiential Jewish education. Abbi was the deputy director of the Jewish Welfare Board, Jewish Chaplains Council, where she worked with Jewish military personnel and veterans. Rabbi Sharovsky is the recipient of the 2016 JPRO Network Young Professional Award for her dedication to the Jewish community through her work in the Jewish not-for-profit field. She is a Rabbis Without Borders Fellow, 2018 cohort. She currently serves on the Executive Council of the Rabbinical Assembly. Abbi lives in Silver Spring with her husband, David Weisel, and their two children. Next, we have Reverend Timothy B. Warner, who was called to the gospel ministry while serving as a deacon at Mount Calvary Baptist Church of Rockville in 1996. He was licensed to preach in 1998 and ordained to pastoral ministry after he completed his Master of Divinity degree at Wesley Theological Seminary in 2003. Reverend Warner was trained as a bacterial geneticist and enjoyed a productive career in pharmaceutical research and development, where he held various scientific and executive leadership positions for over 18 years before committing to full-time ministry. Having served as the Associate Council Director for Community and Economic Development in the Baltimore-Washington Conference of the United Methodist Church, as the Senior Pastor of St. Mark's United Methodist Church in Boyd's, he was appointed in 2008 to ministry on the staff of Montgomery County Executive in his Office of Community Partnerships as the Community Liaison for the African American and Faith Communities, and then to Montgomery County Public Schools as its Chief Engagement and Partnership Officer in 2013. Pastor Warner currently serves as Senior Pastor of both the Emory Grove and Mill Creek Parish United Methodist Churches, where, along with his pastoral duties, he helps faith communities across the county respond to the needs of God's people and creates a forum for dialogue between the government, faith communities, and nonprofit corporations on critical community issues. Most recently, he co-founded the Racial Justice Coalition, an ecumenical group committed to act together across lines of difference on matters of racial justice. Okay, and our final panelist, very thrilled that we were just able to get her today from New York, is Lisa Weitzman. She is the executive producer and co-producer of the movie we saw, Shared Legacies. She also serves on the executive committee of Spill the Honey, an organization committed to promoting human dignity as well as advancing public knowledge of the Holocaust and the Civil Rights Movement. Through programs, sponsored initiatives, and strategic partnerships, Spill the Honey advances cultural tolerance, draws attention to contemporary injustices, and encourages young people to be compassionate global citizens. Spill the Honey has sponsored many community events, bringing both Jewish and African American community high schools together to work on an ongoing joint educational program. To date, over 2,000 high school students have been involved in the Spill the Honey programs. Throughout her career, Lisa has been active in leadership roles and as a board member of several nonprofits, including the Youth Renewal Fund, the Business Council for Peace, the UJA Real Estate Division, and the Tolerance Center, Simon Wiesenthal Center in New York. During her volunteer service with the Simon Wiesenthal Center, she chaired the leadership board for 6 years and held numerous programming and fundraising events. She then co-founded a group within the Simon Wiesenthal Center called Generations Against Genocide, whose mission was to partner with Jewish grassroots organizations embarking on social justice projects globally. Lisa has more than 25 years of experience in the commercial real estate industry, investing with and advising owners of real estate assets across all major property types and investment risk profiles. She is currently a Senior Vice President of Investments at Streetworks Development, a large-scale property development division of HBC Properties and Investment. Ms. Weitzman holds a BA in Management from NYU and an MBA with a concentration in Finance and Real Estate from Columbia Business School. She lives in New York with her husband and daughter. So, wow, on all three counts. Let's turn it over to our panelists, and if you have questions, type them into the chat. Thank you.
Okay. Well, thanks, Lisa. I was told that I am kicking it off. So I actually kind of feel like I am starting in the current and in the current moment, and giving a glimpse of where this could be going. So as Lisa said in my biography, I was ordained in 2012. I am not a second career rabbi, which means that yes, I am young. I am not even 40 years old. So when I viewed Shared Legacies, I viewed it very much as a history lesson. And it was a look back and a look into something that, while I had read about it and while the picture of Rabbi Heschel and Dr. King marching graced the halls of the Jewish Theological Seminary while I was at school there, it was a picture that graced the walls. And it was a lesson that I could read about. And it was something that happened then. I came to the JCRC in summer of 2019. I started July 1st, 2019, moved here from Manhattan. I lived in New York City for about 15 years. And I moved here just in time for a pandemic. And I moved here to take a job where I would work to be a bridge between the Jewish community and other faith communities. I had the great blessing actually of meeting Reverend Warner in person. I think you were probably one of my last in-person meetings for a while, and having a chance to sit together and learn. And what I quickly learned was that the Jewish community had spent, the Jewish community was well overdue for examining how we viewed race, racial justice, and all of the issues that went along with it. And it went on to the list of things that I was going to do it was going to be part of my portfolio at JCRC. Moved to summer of 2020, and the murder of George Floyd, the murder of Breonna Taylor, the murder of way too many Black men and women at the hands of police officers. And we realized that, JCRC as a whole realized that this could no longer be an issue on the back burner. This is an issue that had to be front and center. And the rest of my summer was dedicated to advancing issues of racial justice, developing an anti-racism toolkit, and getting phone calls from rabbis in the community saying, Abby, what are we supposed to do now? And I said, well, we need to start off by listening. We need to start off by hearing the pain and hearing what's going on. And the calls of, can we reach out to a church right now? And I said, well, yes, but why don't you also take a minute to figure out why we're reaching out? Are you reaching out because you want them to know that Heschel and King marched together and once upon a time things were great? Or are you reaching out because you're ready to hear pain? Or are you reaching out because it will make you feel good? And to the credit of so many of my colleagues in this community, so many of my rabbinic colleagues, they took a minute and they said, we need to reach out to hear the pain and learn the stories and to reflect on what we shared in the 60s and figure out what happened since. And we need to be in the present moment. And when I watched the film, I thought about, and one of the things that kept coming back to me was this, it's so clear that so much of the footage of the current interviews, and Lisa, I'm sure you'll be able to add to that. So much of it was filmed in 2018, 2019, pre-pandemic, everything. And what would this film look like if just a year and a half more was added on? How different would it be? And it really made me think about how much we have to do, how much work needs to happen, and what is my role and what is JCRC's role as a white Ashkenazi Jewish woman who can walk through the world with what I see as privilege. What is it that I have to do as, in my role? What is my calling at this moment to speak up and speak out and to be an ally and to bear witness? And also, how can I teach and how can I listen? So I spent a lot of time being corrected by colleagues, definitely by colleagues in the Black community who said, you need to really start listening. You think you're doing good things, you're trying now, good, let's try again. And I deeply, deeply value all of that feedback. I also wonder how do we talk about what went wrong? How do we talk about that breakdown of how we went from this alliance to what happened in the 70s, the 80s, the 90s that brought us to this moment where we had to wait for the point to boil over before we could come back together again. And I'm still struggling with that. I'm struggling with that as a rabbi. I'm struggling with that as someone who is so deeply in the weeds of this conversation with my organization and beyond. And I also look at what does it mean and how we're understanding the intersections of race, of anti-Semitism, of faith, of culture, of all of these different pieces that have to come up, and how we're dealing with the collective traumas of our communities and how they're playing out every day. So I sit with a lot, and as I've seen all over social media this afternoon, and I think it is an apt thought to move forward with. Today's verdict, the guilty verdict, was a step forward. It was a first step. It was a first long overdue step, and we have to take a step somewhere. And I am grateful that the steps are starting, that this is a step that is here. And I think that slowly, one step at a time, we can get there. And I hand it over to when I first started talking about this with Lisa Hedgepeth, she said, who do you think could join you on this? And I said, Tim Warner. You were my first thought. So I am so blessed to be on this panel with you. Oh, yes. I'm handing it over to you now.
Yes. I had to wait for my mouse to catch up with me. But thank you for all the kind words, Rabbi. We are overdue for lunch, and we will do it because there is so much more work to do now than when we first met. And so I'm glad you invited me. I hope I do not disappoint. I just want to start off first by talking a little bit about myself. I think there's something to be said because of when I grew up. I'm a child of an all-Black, all-poor community in the 1960s and 1970s. I remember seeing images of Rabbi Heschel and Martin Luther King walking together on television. I know how integral, experientially, the Jewish community and others were to the civil rights movement. I was reading Rabbi Heschel while listening to Martin Luther King speeches and hearing justice-centered preaching every single week when I was 11 or 12 years old. My pastor then attended Morehouse with Martin Luther King and taught us intentionally and consistently not only how the narrative of the Hebrew children in Egypt was like the African-American story, but that their narrative was our narrative. My Blackness and my Christianity have always been inextricably linked. But what's more is that both parts of that single identity have necessarily been steeped in the justice demanded by the particular God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, for us at least, as revealed in the Christian Godhead. Like Dr. Cornel West, who I first heard say this, I've never known myself to be anything other than a free Black man and an unashamed Christian. I would have never made it through Biblical Hebrew 1 and 2 in the summer that I took them in seminary without the help of Rabbi Daniel Parker, whose synagogue my family cleaned together for years after my father launched his own janitorial business when I was in high school. I went to every bar and bat mitzvah in junior high school because I was the only one of very few Blacks in my classes among a majority of young Jews. I was fascinated with this rite of passage that was rooted in God, wondering why the African-American community doesn't have one of these in either our religious or cultural tradition. I sat Shiva with many families with whom my family is intimately connected, and as well as sitting at many a Passover Seder, thinking what a gift it is to have a mandatory discussion at the dining room table about how far God has brought the Jewish family and the Jewish people from slavery, and lamenting that there is no such experience in the Black church where the youngest child needs to ask the oldest person in the room what makes tonight different from any other night. I've been blessed during the entire course of my public ministry to have done so with Jewish friends and leaders at my side, among others, collaborating with me as we sought to build authentic community together. Part of the challenge for me today, in the midst of such unrest around social justice in this country, the verdict that was announced today, all of what's going on around the world, when the relationship between Blacks and Jews seems strained at best, is that while Blacks are surviving in the current suffering, we are not thriving. And I can't help but feel that there are some pages from the Jewish notebook that need to be shared and digested. What's worse, the thing that's most critical for that to happen is the formation and leveraging of relationships of trust on which a future of justice where everybody thrives can be built. According to Cornel West, that's what love looks like in public. That's justice. Relationships of trust, particularly those which cross racialized barriers, are essential to any meaningful community change. I've learned that over the years. Those relationships matter most when we can work together, where the structures of structural racism can be torn down together and can be reconstructed with God's shalom, those scriptural ideas that grew into the kingdom of God in the Christian context, where everyone has in mind the best interests of the other. I believe Rabbi Heschel when I read that when one understands the spark of the divine that exists in another human being, he or she cannot harbor hatred for them. And that's why that we are where we are some 50 years later is such a problem for me. It's a problem for all of us. Here's what he also said in his opening address at the National Conference on Religion and Race in Chicago, January of 1963, at which King was also a featured speaker. And this is where this very old rubber still meets a road that's too long and winding for us tonight. Seen in the light of our religious tradition, the Negro problem is God's gift to America. The test of our integrity, a magnificent spiritual opportunity. America, it seems to me, still has the chance to find redemption through our efforts to eliminate the sinful scourge of racism. It's possible. More to our point tonight, God's people, that's us, have to lead the rest of the world in seizing this magnificent spiritual opportunity. A few years ago, I was asked to speak at Adas Israel downtown after the Pittsburgh massacre. When I was asked, I was happy to do it. I literally said to the absolute glee of the more than 1,000 people who were there, I'm here tonight because you are my tribe. People who believe in Tikkun Olam are my kind of people. Africans enslaved and subjugated in America have been through something, and we descendants are still going through something. You need to know that. Not only have Jews endured unimaginable suffering at the hands of hateful people for millennia, but they have also survived and thrived. That's my story too. And once you've been a part of that story, standing against injustice, it seems, is an essential necessity. But in this crucial moment in the history of our nation, that has been normalized and racialized historical and cultural whiteness, where once despised Jews have become racially white, where we've been living the way we have been living for over 400 years based on stolen labor, done by people who did the work without compensation, against their will, on stolen land, where police still kill us because of what they fear in us. The major question I have for us this evening is, are you, my Jewish sisters and brothers, more white than you are the free and redeemed people of the Lord? I was reminded of this by a scene from James Baldwin's documentary entitled, I Am Not Your Negro. But there's a movie called The Defiant One, set in the 1950s America, stars Sidney Poitier and Tony Curtis, and it came out exactly 3 years before I was born. It tells a story of two escaped prisoners, one white and one Black, shackled together, who have to cooperate in order to survive. Somehow, in the midst of the story, they find their common humanity. In the same year that actually spawned the civil rights movement, There's a moment in that movie where they're running for a train to elude the police. Sidney gets on the train. Tony, of course, cannot run fast enough to get on. And rather than leave this racialized white man with whom he has found his common humanity, Sidney Poitier jumps off the train to help him. This Black man putting his freedom and his potential prosperity at risk for his white brother. Live or die, he was apparently thinking, we have to do it together. My friend and my brother, Art Wallenstein, who was then the director of corrections in this county, was the first one to call me when hateful people desecrated our little tiny church in Boyd's, Maryland in the early 2000s. He cried when he spoke these words of solidarity to me on the telephone. Pastor, if you need me to come down there and sit on the steps of your church all night, I'll do it. The reason he cried was because he is Jewish and I am Christian. And we are both of us, we understand ourselves to be God's people. And we are linked through our suffering to God's freedom and to God's redemption and to God's justice. The Lord requires justice. And because we are the Lord's, he requires us to do justice, not so much to talk about it, but actually to do it. So one of the things I want us to think about tonight is what does it look like in 2021 for Jewish people to jump off their individual and collective trains on behalf of Black people? Now I'll pass it off to Lisa Weitzman so she can spill a little more honey out for us. Lisa?
There's a lot's already said. It's all great, and I'm glad this movie was done just to start. You know, it's one of the main goals is to start and continue conversations. So, and we wanted to tackle both anti-Semitism because that was reemerging in the last few years, and it really never leaves. You know, and racism. So, because of our affiliation with Clarence, and I'll go into some of the history, but Clarence was a head of Stanford's Center for Martin Luther King Center, and he noticed all the anti-Semitism on campus. This is just some of the origins of how the film got started and percolated. Is Clarence said all this anti-Semitism, you know, I promised Martin Luther King way back when. He turned to me and said, if ever there was a time that our Black brothers were not strong with us, with Jews, you know, in the fight against anti-Semitism, we have to tell the story of the alliance and the brotherhood. So let me take that brotherhood word to kind of go back to what Reverend Pointer said, was that is the key. And I think the importance that this film did come out because it's oral history. It's Torah Sheba'al Peh of the deep brotherhood on many, many levels, not just Martin Luther King and Heschel, but on other examples that we can talk about later, that's showing it went beyond alliance. It started with a common goal to change, but it grew through trust and through justice as the end result into deep friendships and relationships. And I think this film's about relationships. And that's the lessons we need today to pull and cull through and use. So it's not just history, but as we know in Talmud, oral history and the Torah is a living document. So hopefully we take this history and realize there's arcs to a story and to our history, and there are breakups, and we cover them, but we don't dwell on them because that's to be studied and talked about, because it is there, but it's also there's hope, and there's the overreaching goal is to reestablish in stronger numbers the relationship. And what we didn't have time to, we did film, and what didn't make it into the ending of the film, because we were, Atlanta was such the epicenter of a strong bond of Jewish Black Alliance. There was the 20th anniversary of the film festival last year, in February. So we completed the film to make it to that 20th anniversary where John Lewis could be there, and Andrew Young and Clarence and all these great lions in attendance. So what you didn't see is, which is sad because of Rabbi Sharovsky, you said, what would we do if we can still make films, by the way. Our Spill the Honey is an organization, and we will continue to continue the story. But what we didn't show is that though there was a breakup, there is still alliances, grassroots on the ground today. And I think like Andrew Goodman Foundation, I think if you saw the film and you know about Andrew Goodman, and David Goodman started a foundation having kids across college campuses work together on voting. And in your own hometown, Operation Understanding. So it's not that there is not an alliance there, and we have to give credit to all the young people that are really working hard today. It's just that there's no national figures, and there wasn't until George Floyd. And I think that's the spark that maybe some of these grassroots organizations can just get more recognition, become more alive, understand what they're doing is not just social justice, but it's in the context of history, both biblical history, spiritual history, Holocaust history, all these motivations that have driven people to work together, and their families can now come together. So though we completed the film, it's not, there's so much that can be taken, and we will continue. We're making shorts of those young people, because it's truly inspirational to see Blacks and Jews, young kids working together on causes that we need them to focus on. So I'll just give you a little bit of my personal history, what kind of the brotherhood and sisterhood in my family is. Both my parents are Holocaust survivors in different ways. My mom was saved in Poland. She was born in 1940 and given over to Christians to be saved when she was 2. And so she survived. Her parents did not survive, but she was given over to Christians, and they raised her. And she didn't know she was Jewish. And the twist on this story is a lot of people that were hidden find out much later that they were Jewish. My mom, someone came to get my mom at the age of 6. They walked into town, this small town outside Krakow, and said, "Where is the Jewish girl, my cousin? I've promised to get her." And she knocks on the door of her step-parent, of the Christian parents, and wants to take her to an orphanage in Israel. And my mom didn't want to go, and they didn't. And actually the woman, the cousin, didn't really want to take her. If she didn't want to go, no harm. So she stayed in Poland living under anti-Semitism. Everyone found out she was Jewish, and she was really, one day she was loved, and the next day she was hated. But the story, what it did for me was, these people that saved her, these Christians were just holy, right? To save a life. It's in my family, they're righteous among the nations. They put aside the risk and the harm. They didn't give her to an orphanage. They were dirt poor, and they raised her, and the resilience and hope of that family. And they taught her about Jesus, even though, she was terrified to go to church because everybody said, "You killed Jesus, you're a Jew." It was really tremendous. And anyway, she raised us to be actually conservadox. I went to Hebrew day school, but the lesson is that there is hope, and that there's resilience, and that there's struggle, and that there's differences. And even her step-parents weren't perfect. Not her stepmom was a saint, but her stepdad, but there's difficulty in any relationships. And so I picture our difficulties as being challenges that every human has, that there's jobs, there's real practical concerns. And the Jews are white, and they, a lot of them, there's Jews of color that really we're focusing on too. But anyway, I've taken up the time, but that's my motivation. So when I met Clarence 20 years ago, through business. Who would have thought? I mean, through real estate, yeah. I got introduced to him, and I was running the Wiesenthal Center, and Clarence told me his history, and I couldn't believe it. So I was the head of programming, and I invited him in, Carolyn Goodman, who's Andrew Goodman's mom, to speak. And then Clarence and I developed a friendship, and lo and behold, I called him. I was working on a project for Rwandan orphans, and I called Clarence, I need your help. And he goes, call Shaare Rogers. And Shaare Rogers is the director of this film, and the rest is history. He put us together, and she then went on to, you know, interview all these dignitaries and lions, and we've captured the oral history, and that oral history is irrefutable. It's so, the stories go on. They're really living testimonies to this relationship. And we learned through the Holocaust that every story counts. So every story counts here. And we hope to make more stories, given the current bond that we're forming. So that's all for now. I appreciate you all watching it and having me join you.
All right, thank you all so much. Yeah, that was amazing from all three of you. I learned a lot, and I think there are one or two questions in the chat, but please, if you can think of anything, comments, questions, and I think Rabbi Lehman will mostly facilitate what comes up.
So the first question is an easy question. I like to start with an easy question, and that's for, I think, Lisa Weitzman. How can we share the documentary with others? I mean, the distributor is Menemsha Films.
Right.
Films, and there's a charge for that. So is it, if people on their own, can they go to Menemsha Films to rent it? Or?
They can. We're right now, this is our first year, COVID adjustments. So we're trying, so it is seen through Menemsha Films, and it's not a you know, it's a cost, but it's not a huge cost. But we can, if you reach out on our website, we also have a list of screenings that are not necessarily through film festivals or synagogues, and we could put you on we could let you know when that's coming and include you. So happy, I can share my email, and we'll figure that out. Okay. No problem. So
there are a couple of questions here, and I don't know, Rabbi Abbi, if you want to handle these questions, or maybe you and I together. So one is from Mike Withers, one of our co-hosts. Do you feel the Jewish community has been vocal enough and visible over the last several years as the Black community have experienced a scourge of racism and injustices? And to piggyback onto that, Melanie Goldstein asks about, I would like to hear more about how to be more Jewish versus more white, the challenging question that Reverend Warner asked in his presentation. So, Rabbi Abbi, do you want to?
Sure.
I mean, these are difficult things, and I'm sorry I'm laughing. It's
no,
it's very challenging.
I feel like I could answer this question. Do you feel the Jewish community has been vocal enough? And in a very typical rabbinic way, I feel like I can give several answers to one question. Mm-hmm. First, how do we define vocal enough? Mm. Can you ever be too vocal about racism, about xenophobia, about anti-Semitism? No. So have we been vocal enough? I do not think so. And I think that how Jews in this country, and I will say specifically white Ashkenazi, meaning Eastern European, Jews from a certain point of Europe who end up looking a lot like me and like you, Jonah, Rabbi Lehman. I think that, have we been vocal enough? Probably not. And how have we, and the question that I ask back, and I ask to myself often is, we know that we haven't been vocal enough, and why is that? And for me, and as I came into this work within JCRC, and about a year or so before I took this job, I really started to struggle with how I understood the ideas of racial justice, and struggle with the specific 3 words, Black Lives Matter, taking it away from a movement, taking it away from any kind of political thing, just looking at simply 3 words, and trying to understand in myself, why was that hard to say? And what did that mean? And what I have had to learn, and where I've had to grow, is realizing that I can hold more than one trauma. I can hold more than one communal pain. I can fully be with, I can fully say that Black Lives Matter, and not be betraying the Jewish community, and not be betraying other groups, other countries, anything. That things can stand in individual spaces, and it's okay. As we say in our office, we can walk and chew gum at the same time. And I think that that's been a really crucial piece in, have we been vocal enough? No. And I think it's time to not just beat our chests about that, but also examine why, and start to understand the why behind the answer.
So that's great. I just want to add one thing, and then I want to ask you another question from that Susan Rubenstein has in the chat. But I just want to. So I'm a little bit older than you are, and I do remember being 6 years old, watching the news about Dr. Martin Luther King's assassination. So I also, being the child of a rabbi and grown up with such a love and devotion to Jewish history, understand that how we get involved, how individuals get involved in social justice could be for a whole variety of reasons. And one thing is that as a Jewish people, as I explained in the last time that 2 congregations, 2 communities met, with a long history of persecution that the Jewish community has suffered over the centuries, Jews came to America in order to escape all that suffering, and that it's reasonable as a human emotion to say, I'm free, and hide behind whiteness that the Jewish people can do, to hide behind whiteness and be under the radar and escape for a blip of time in 2,000 years of persecution, for the few 100 years or so in America of totally being free in America. There's something to that, possibly, about why maybe not all Jews are on the train that Reverend Warner said about on behalf of Black people. And at the same time, we're living in a time in America where Blacks and Jews and Asians and Muslims, just to name a few, are under attack. And so I think that it is a very nuanced, complicated question about how to be involved today and to speak up, that we have to recognize partly our own history individually as an Ashkenazi white Jew, about the history of persecution that I bear on my shoulders, And at the same time, the biblical rabbinic mandate to stand up for others, that we're going to be reading from the weekly Torah portion this week. Al ta'amod al dam re'echa, don't stand idly by.
In the
We
blood
have
of your
a
neighbor.
mandate to stand up. So it's just a complicated thing, and there's not much else I have to say about that. I just wanted to throw that out there. So Susan Rubenstein asked the question, can Rabbi Abbi speak about a bit more on what she learned about how to be a better listener from her Black colleagues and friends?
It was this really important moment where I realized that I didn't have to be right, and which was huge for me. I also, even more than being even more about me speaking about how I learned it, what I think is also the biggest part is to realize when I've talked enough. And I think I have on this, and realize that my voice is not the only one that needs to be heard here. And with that, I want to model how to be a better ally, and simply pass the conversation on to onto other panelists, onto to Reverend Warner, to Pastor Pointer, and let them talk about what they need and where to go in this conversation.
Can we put our weight, Pastor Pointer asked this question, can we put our weight behind the George Floyd legislation and become more vocal? So what do you mean by that, Pastor Pointer? You have to, yeah.
It was mentioned that most of us who are on this platform were grateful to God for the verdict that was rendered by the jury of the peers of George Floyd against Officer Chauvin, and that was a step. And certainly it was a step. It was a huge first step, quite frankly. But that was a local application. And we live in the US of A. There is legislation on the national scale that would apply what we are grateful for to God and give thanks to God, as you did in your prayer, that's available sitting on a national scale. And our sphere of influence perhaps goes beyond what we are aware. Both as individuals, we know persons who can move things. Even as the film that I watched on Sunday, there were individuals there who had tentacles that reached beyond Dr. K, and who got things done on a national scale that otherwise would not have occurred. Can we apply the same opportunities, influence, so that we move the nation? Do we underestimate the influence that God may have given us?
So I would say, just as we are building this partnership together, Pastor, that could be one of the paths that we take together to see how strong this partnership is together and what we can use that strength for in order to make positive change in our community, in our state, in the nation. And I think the more unified we are in our mission, the stronger our message is. And I think the more it would be heard.
If I could dive in here just for a moment, I've been
Please.
sort of hanging back
Yeah.
because this is a dialogue between two congregations, neither one of which is mine. Although I was really grateful when I came to worship at Roundup that I experienced authentic worship in the African American tradition. There is such a thing, and it goes across denominations. Just part of the gift of the Middle Passage was that we found God in a different way here, and so we worship that way. But the point I wanted to make is that part of my work over the years has been community organizing, and there's some principles there that I think could be useful for your two congregations. You have reached together a point where you are beginning to understand a common history, that there is a story of us that has emerged among the two of you, and that is emerging. And I would encourage both the congregations to lean into that. And the way you do that authentically is to build individual and collective relationships between the congregations. That is, Black people need to sit under Jewish tables and eat, and vice versa. You need to sit in each other's sanctuaries, right? Regardless of what you believe, be present with one another, hear one another's stories, develop relationships of trust. As you do that, what will emerge is a sense of urgency about what you must do together. And that may not be tomorrow, but boy, this verdict offers us a moment to really lean into. And I think Ruach, the Holy Ghost, as we call it in the African American tradition, biblically, will inspire us as to what to do together, right? That will emerge through us as those congregations come together.
So I am right on with that. The tragedy is the COVID-19 vaccine, COVID-19 virus, which is preventing people from sitting together and breaking bread together and learning from each other and appreciating each other's story and building relationships. And that I think is a challenge as we slowly become fully vaccinated, and I'm hoping that everybody on this screen is planning to get vaccinated, that the more people are vaccinated, the more that we can safely sit together and continue this partnership in this deeper, more personal way.
One way, Rabbi, that might be helpful, might be useful, might be implemented.
Yeah.
Something Rabbi Mickey Safra and I, who studied together
Yes.
from time to time, on Martin Luther King weekend, did a pulpit exchange. So he preached in my churches, and I preached at the synagogue. It was a marvelous experience, but you would be surprised about the extent to which people resonate with the same message, regardless of who it's coming from.
No, absolutely. We've already recognized that just on Zoom together, Pastor Pointer and I, about the power of these sessions that we've had so far. And yes, I look forward to the day that we can be in each other's church and synagogue to be able to experience worship together.
The gift for your congregation is that Pastor Pointer is probably the most gifted preacher in Montgomery County. Probably.
Flattery will get you nowhere. But thanks for the encouragement. It is critical that we can do Zoom and we can communicate orally, verbally, but discernment at a deeper level happens when I look in your eyes.
Yes.
And I see your body movement as we are trying to relate.
Yes.
So much more can be gathered from contact, personal fellowship. And of course, as the rabbi has said, we can't do that right now. But yes, I am vaccinated, and I trust that everyone will become vaccinated and do the other protocols so that we can, as soon as possible,
Yeah.
get together.
So, you may have noticed Mike Withers' question about what was, to me, which was what was so complicated. And I'm not avoiding it, Mike. It's just, I'm conscious of the time.
Yeah, I got you.
To answer that question, I alluded to the complication in terms of the centuries of Jewish history, and personal, people's personal escape from oppression and persecution, wanting to hide behind something, and at the same time understanding the imperative that all human beings have to help one another. So that's what I meant by the complication. There's a human personal desire, and then there's the equal obligation of being involved as a responsible human being. So we probably should devote another session just about those complications. But
Right.
The closing questions that we have here that will lead us on to the next thing. One is Lisa Hedgepath has a question for Lisa Weitzman about the curriculum that your group is working on and the importance of reaching school-age children. And then a couple of other questions were about what are our next steps. So maybe Lisa Weitzman, if you can answer that question about the curriculum there that's in the chat, and then maybe Lisa and Mike, we can get to the closing remarks, which are the next, what we think the next steps will be.
Sure. Yeah, we think that we started off, you read about the 2,000 high school kids. That was before this film. We filmed over 5 years, and we have about 80 hours of interviews, and only a fraction of that made it into the film. So there's a lot of depth to the conversations that we've had, and we want to sort of build 14-minute shorts that capture a specific person and give some context and connect it to today, so that religious leaders in partnership, for example, we could talk about the Rabbi Rothschild in Atlanta leading to Reverend Warnock and Rabbi Berg in partnership in being in the Senate, right? Or we could talk about Reverend Pointer and Rabbi Lehman being the cutting edge influence in Montgomery County. And so we will connect some of that curriculum and supplement it so that a high school can have a film, and then they can pick out from an array of shorts different topics to cover, whether it's in history, literature, and we'll have short curriculum resources and questions. I mean, we're fundraising for that, but that's our goal, to really be the content provider to help organizations and others with these types of multimedia educational tools.
Great. Great. So Mike and Lisa, just looking at the agenda that our panelists were sharing, I think we're right on time now for where we wanted to start wrapping up.
Right.
And that wrapping up is about next steps. So how do we tackle that?
Yeah, this has certainly been great, been enlightening. The movie was great, and I think a theme that came out of this is the relationship building. And Rabbi, you and I had a private conversation about some things, relationship building, and we had talked about our relationship model, that forming stage, as we go into the storming stage. So if we can continue with the forming, we can reduce the storming. So there was some prior interviews that we watched today that had Shaare Rogers and some other folks, and the question was asked about the elephant in the room. And what should you do about the elephant in the room? Should you leave him there, or should you address the elephant in the room? And the obvious answer is that we want this to go certainly where it can be, it has great possibilities, and talent and potential are dangerous words if you don't do something about them to help develop them. So next steps for us continue with the forming, and I think we will discuss offline with our committee how we want to move that forward. There were some suggestions up. One had to do with taking a dive at the calendar and developing some information over there, because we really want to get our young folks involved in this process as well. We thought that calendar is a great tool to start engaging our young folks as we start getting to the next step. So that is the direction that I think we were heading on this side as we continue to form and broaden the engagement of what we're doing here, and continue to work on that relationship building, and as much of that discernment as we can do over the Zoom platform. Lisa?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yes, okay. I couldn't imagine that you were already done. So a couple things. First, to learn more about the company that made this film, Shared Legacies, I urge you to go to spillthehoney.com. Lisa, is that right?
Yep, that's it.
Amazing organization. And I also said we can kind of research where there are other screenings of the film that you could maybe hop onto. Hopefully that there are several people who weren't able to watch that want to do that. Rabbi Abbi had one more thing she wanted to say. And I don't know what the word is, but when we talked about this months ago, I think Mike and I, maybe in November, this partnership, what we thought the goals were going to be, and this is how relationships evolve, but each time we meet and come up with ideas, the end goal change. Well, it doesn't really change, but the route to get there has changed with every meeting because it grows tentacles in different directions. And I think it has just enriched the journey. And I hope that all of you are finding this fulfilling, and that I thought this film was a great jump off point, and that we are such a model for what that film was talking about, and how we can reclaim and rebuild this relationship that is still so critical in this country. We will be in touch with our next steps, but Rabbi Abbi wanted to say something as well.
Yeah, it's been such an honor to be here with everyone tonight, especially at this very powerful moment in our nation's history. One of the things that I've learned is that thoughts and prayers aren't enough, and JCRC has had to really put its to take action and really take that message to heart. And I'm very proud to say that our legislative season, which just ended, focused a lot on criminal justice reform, and we are continuing to advocate for that in Maryland, getting rid of abolishing the law enforcement officers' Bill of Rights, and working so that there will be a safer and more just system for all people in this state. And I am happy to share more information about that. Lisa knows how to get in touch. Lisa Hedgepeth knows how to get in touch with me. And if for one way forward, there is a space for advocacy and taking legislative action, Pastor Pointer, and I hope we can walk together in that.
So I want to thank very much first Lisa Hedgepeth and Mike Withers, the chair people of Shaare, Tefila, and Round Oak Missionary Baptist Church, for spearheading this partnership, and to my clergy partner in Pastor Pointer for making this happen, and for our guest panelists tonight for challenging us with their presentations, Rabbi Abbi Sharovsky, Pastor Timothy Warner and Lisa Weitzman. So thank you all very much for sharing with us, for challenging us, and personally to Mike Withers for keeping on prodding me as well. And I think that prodding hopefully will be mutual, so that we can benefit from each other's prodding, and that all of us who participate can be the beneficiaries of that as well, and that we prod each other for a spirited forming that will lead to storming, using your word, Mike. Hopefully with blessings along the way.
Yes. Yes. Now, what's that saying? Injustice somewhere is injustice everywhere. How am I saying it right?
Yeah.
Something like that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere.
Right.
I think.
Okay. All right. So at the end of the day, as we spoke, Rabbi, that is where we're wanting to get to address that. That's through legislative action, and God give us the strength to get there, and we will get there through much prodding and pushing, and we have to come out of our comfort zone at times to get there. So we will continue to prod and love, as they say.
Absolutely. Amen.
Very good.
And it's not even 9 o'clock yet. How about that?
Yes, we made it under 9. Yes.
So have a good night, everybody. Thank you all for joining us, our panelists and our attendees. Thank you.
One more thing, if anybody
Thank you.
would like a copy of the EJI calendar and hasn't gotten one, there are several copies at Shaare Tefila, and I still have a few that weren't distributed. It's only April. This calendar is amazing. This is what Mike was referring to, or Pastor Pointer was referring to. There are several copies available, and if you want, you can contact the synagogue or Mike or me, and we'll get one to you.
Yes, and I even have some extras myself. So it's a great read. It is amazing.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.